What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 12 unusual facts you never knew about Queen Victoria. Just as the Victorian era is incorrectly portrayed as a period of demureness, misconceptions about the British monarchy, specifically Queen Victoria, are equally persistent. In fact, Victoria's court has a lot of crazy stories about the royal family, the most famous of which usually have to do with the standards she set for Victorian mourning practices. However, despite accounts of her puritanical tendencies, Victoria was actually quite fond of sex and had a deep appreciation for the naked human form. Even the contents of her grave, the things she wanted to be interred with for eternity, had some highly sexual overtones that spoke to the question of what sex was like during the Victorian era. While she took pleasure in the joys of the flesh, her life was also marked by a great deal of loneliness, from her isolated days as a child to her many years of mourning for her late husband Albert. However, despite her more difficult times, she was able to lead the British monarchy during a time of great peace and prosperity, at least for the British, as the second longest reigning English monarch, reigning for more than 60 years from 1837 to 1901. She had a fondness for nudes. Although she was often depicted as prudish, Queen Victoria was reportedly quite comfortable with the human figure. An exhibit of the paintings the royal couple gifted to one another revealed that Victoria's tastes were actually a little more risque than her husband's. While his tastes ran closer to the demure, Victoria gave her husband Albert several paintings that featured bare flesh, including William Edward Frost's Una Among the Fauns and Wood Nymphs and the Disarming of Cupid, as well as Franz Xaver Winterhalter's Florinda. She also commissioned an intimate portrait of herself now known as The Secret Picture, which was made to be seen only by the prince. Victoria's languid pose, her distant, unfocused gaze, and her free-flowing hair would have been considered tantalizing at the time, despite the fact that they may not appear particularly appealing to us now. She disliked children despite having 9 of them. To be fair, after having given birth to 9 children in less than 17 years, you probably wouldn't be gushing about the pleasures of motherhood and pregnancy. When she had her first child, Vicky, Victoria was awestruck by the miracle of birth, telling her ladies-in-waiting, "It seems like a dream having a child." She was awake and very sweet, and I must say, I was very proud of her. However, her opinion on babies and children changed as the years passed. When a newly married Vicky expressed her joy at the thought of being a mother, the Queen told her daughter, "What you say about the pride of giving life to an immortal soul is very fine, dear, but I admit that I can't enter into that. I think much more about our being like a cow or a dog at such moments, when our poor nature becomes so very animal and unecstatic," the author wrote. She also expressed her disgust about the lottery of marriage and childbearing, saying, "All marriage is such a lottery. The happiness is always an exchange, though it may be a very happy one. Still the poor woman is bodily and morally the husband's slave. That always sticks in my throat. When I think of a merry, happy, and free young girl, and look at the ailing, aching state a young wife is generally doomed to, which you can't deny is the penalty of marriage." She introduced hemophilia to several European royal bloodlines. Hemophilia has been referred to as the royal disease, because it was passed down to a number of European ruling families through Queen Victoria. It is a rare inherited disease that affects blood's ability to clot. Victoria's son Leopold had hemophilia, and 2 of her daughters were carriers. Her daughter Beatrice, who married into the Spanish ruling family, passed the gene to Spain's male heir. One of Victoria's other daughters, Alice, had a daughter who was a carrier of the disease and passed it on to Russia's male heir to the throne. At least 7 attempts to assassinate her were made. During the course of her reign, Queen Victoria was attacked on at least 7 separate occasions by madmen, some of whom may have been harbored unhealthy fascinations with the Queen. Many of these attempts happened while the Queen was traveling in her carriage, and at least 4 of the attempts involved a gun. Although several shots were fired at Victoria, she made it through each attempt physically unscathed with one exception. A well-dressed man approached the royal carriage on June 27, 1850, as Victoria and 3 of her children were returning to Buckingham Palace, and he struck Victoria in the head with his cane. It would appear that the blow was so powerful that it broke the Queen's bonnet and spilled blood. None of the men who made attempts on the Queen's life were sentenced to death. The majority of them were found to be mentally unsound, and as a result, they were either sent to a penal colony or imprisoned for the duration of Victoria's rule. Regarding all of the attempts on her life, Queen Victoria said, "It is worth being shot at to see how much one is loved." She wasn't allowed to spend time with other children. As part of their efforts to control the future royal heir, Victoria's mother and Sir John Conroy developed a disciplinary regime called the Kensington System, which limited young Victoria's freedom and kept her under constant supervision. It ensured that Victoria would be accompanied by someone at all times. Her mother slept beside her, and she wasn't even permitted to walk down the stairs without someone holding her hand. All of her actions were controlled and monitored. However, despite having someone with her at all times, her mother and Conroy restricted her interactions with the rest of the royal family and almost never allowed her to meet other children. As a result, she lived a life that was quite isolated. They hoped that once Victoria was crowned, the two adults would be able to control and manipulate her through this strict rule. Unfortunately, they underestimated Victoria's resilience and willpower. The first two things Victoria asked for upon reaching the age of majority were an hour of complete solitude and her own bedroom. She spied on her children to control them. Growing up in a highly controlled environment didn't make Victoria any less controlling. Quite the opposite, in fact. She hired a number of spies to monitor her children's activities and report back to her. She also wanted her youngest child, Beatrice, to remain unmarried and by her side for the remainder of her life. Victoria remained silent for nearly 6 months after Beatrice's marriage. Victoria's actions toward her beloved Albert were even more shocking. It is said that during these fights, Albert would become afraid of the Queen and the two would get into passionate arguments. Albert would apparently write notes under her door rather than face her in person because it appeared that her temper was so ferocious. She had hundreds of dolls. Since Victoria wasn't allowed to play with other children, she spent much of her time playing with her dolls. Given that 132 of the Queen's dolls have been preserved, she must have owned hundreds because she played with them until she was 14 years old. Although Victoria made her own exquisitely crafted costumes for the dolls themselves were unadorned. The dolls' wardrobes were made of high-quality silk, expensive lace, and even small jewels. The young princess would dress the dolls as members of court. One doll was made to look like Queen Elizabeth I, characters from plays and operas, and ballet dancers. She proposed to her husband. While it would be awesome if Victoria proposed to Albert because she had this super progressive streak to her, the real reason she did the proposing was because, as sovereign, she had to. She warmly described the moment in her journal. "At about 1/2 page 12, I sent for Albert," the Queen wrote on the day. "After a few minutes, I told him that I thought he must be aware of why I wanted them to come here, and that it would make me too happy if he would consent to what I wanted, to marry me," she continued. "He came to the closet where I was alone. We embraced repeatedly, and he was so kind and affectionate. Truly felt like the best and happiest time of my life." She set the standard for white wedding gowns. While she wasn't the first royal to wear a white dress to her wedding, that was Queen Philippa, she was the royal to popularize it. At the time, most wedding dresses were colorful, with red being a favorite when Victoria married. Historically, women who chose to wear white on their wedding day did so not because it was a symbol of a woman's purity, which is a widely held misconception, but because it was a sign of one's wealth. Ornate white fabric was extremely valuable during Victoria's time, making it challenging to clean white clothing. This is why many women wore colored gowns for their wedding. It was easier to hide the stains. So did Victoria choose to wear white to show the world the breadth of her wealth? Some scholars seem to think so, but others argue that the Queen wore white as a sign of support for the working-class lace workers. Handmade lace was swiftly becoming replaced with factory-produced lace, and many textile workers found themselves unemployed. Victoria was able to emphasize the intricate lace of her dress and make a statement by wearing a white dress. 3 of her children perished before her. There's some debate about the life expectancy during the Victorian period, but most studies place the average death age between the late 30s and the late 50s. Queen Victoria, stubborn as she was, lived until the age of 81, reigning for 63 years. In addition to outliving her husband Albert, She outlived 3 of her children. The first of her children to die was Princess Alice, who passed away after she caught diphtheria from her son. It's said that she caught the infection after she kissed her son, Ernest, who also had diphtheria. She was consoling him after the death of one of her daughters who had died of the illness weeks before. Leopold, Victoria's son, fell and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, resulting in his death. He was in Cannes, France at the time, sent there by his doctor because the warm weather was better for his joint pain, which was caused by his hemophilia. The last of Victoria's children to die before her was Prince Alfred, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He died of throat cancer at the age of 55. She mourned her husband's death for 40 years. Queen Victoria outlived her husband Albert, who died at the age of 42 after a 2-year-long illness. At the time, doctors diagnosed him with violent case of typhoid fever, but modern doctors believe that he may have been suffering from Crohn's disease. Albert's death took its toll on Victoria, who fell into a crippling state of depression. Her pain was so consuming that she refused to make a public appearance for nearly 3 years. The appropriate or expected period of mourning during the Victorian era was a year, but Victoria mourned the loss of her husband for the rest of her life, wearing black for her remaining 40 years. She also ordered that Albert's rooms stay exactly as he had left them, instructing her servants to lay out fresh clothes for her husband every day in addition to replacing the water in his basin for washing. Her first name was not Victoria. There is a tradition of British monarchs taking a new name once they ascend to the throne. For example, King George VI was born Albert Frederick Arthur George, but he chose to reign as King George. Queen Victoria's first name was actually Alexandrina, but she chose to reign as Victoria. It is said that she chose Victoria as her regal name as a sign of strength and a means of asserting her independence from her mother and Sir John Conroy.